Welcome back to Beyond Campus, a podcast that delves into various topics pertaining to Israel, Zionism, and having a positive connection to Israel on campus and beyond. I'm your host, Destiny Albritton with the Israel on Campus Coalition. This episode's special guest is Pastor Dumisani Washington. Pastor Dumisani is the founder of the Institute for Black Solidarity for Israel, where he boldly advocates for Israel while strengthening relations between Black and Jewish communities. Before his current role, Pastor Dumisani served as the Diversity Outreach Coordinator at Christians United for Israel, where he has inspired people from various communities to proudly stand with the Jewish state. Thanks for joining us today. Enjoy the show. For our listeners who are, perhaps familiar with both me and Pastor Dumisani, you might not know that Pastor Dumisani, when I was a college student at the University of Missouri, he visited my campus and spoke a couple of times. And, in addition to that, we used to work together. So just through many seasons of life, Pastor Dumisani and his family have just known me and really watched me grow up in many ways. And so it's so special to have you on the podcast today.
It's great to be with you, Destiny. It really is.
I want to start by asking you, I don't know if I've ever asked you this, because since I've known you and since I've met you, you've been such a strong figure in the pro-Israel movement. How did you end up here? Like, what made you think, oh, I'm going to be a professional, Zionist activist? Like, what got you on this path?
It was none of my planning. It's none of my doing. So, short version of a very long story, because I know we don't have a long time, is that I've always been somewhat a spiritual Zionist, if you will, right? Came up in church in a very traditional kind of Black Baptist gospel tradition in terms of music, in terms of teaching and those types of things, right? Nothing very unique, but also musician. So the music was very, very intimate to me as well in that way, and playing and writing and everything. And then also Destiny, I was very much steeped in our tradition, our family's tradition. I grew up in California, but I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, right? And this is the late 60s, so it was still the segregated South. I didn't know anything about Arkansas. We moved when I was a baby, but my parents told me so many stories. My dad's dad was a sharecropper. My mom's, they say they lived near North Little Rock, and so they knew the families that desegregated the North Little Rock High School and called the Little Rock Nine. And so there's a lot of pride in tradition, right? We talked about my mom's school, Scipio James High School. All these things kind of converged for me, along with, like I said, love for Israel and everything, and love for Africa. That's a whole nother discussion. I'm giving you the Cliff Notes version. My first trip to Israel was 2012 in December, Hanukkah, as part of CUFI's Christians United for Israel's African American Pastors Tour. Had never been there before. And all those strands of my life just kind of converged at the Western Wall while I was there. My love for Africa, my love for Israel, and a desire to do an advocacy to strengthen the ties between the Black and Jewish community in Israel and Africa. Came back home and started the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. Maybe you don't know, I started that a year before I was on staff with CUFI. I did that for about a year. Joined CUFI after that at that time it was David Brogg, who had asked me to come on. And so I kind of fell into it. It wasn't really a plan, but it just kind of happened.
Wow. So I didn't know that your first trip to Israel was with a CUFI trip. I just thought you came out of the womb with a star, just, waving an Israeli flag. I had no idea.
I came out of the womb with the love for it, if you want to, but I had never been. I always wanted to go. As a matter of fact, when I was told it, my friend Victor Stursky, who was already on staff at the time, again, I wasn't obviously on staff, but when my name was pulled, I was just, kind of like won a lottery. I was very excited because I always wanted to go. Quick story, my first ever exposure to the modern state of Israel was when I was in high school, right? It was not on my radar. I wanted spiritual Zionism, right? Music, the word, that type of thing, but I didn't know anything about the state of Israel, nothing at all, right? But it was in 1984, I'm dating myself now, was my senior year in high school, 84, 85, right? Of course, November 84 was Operation Moses. And I'm literally destiny when it's on TV. My mom's watching the news and my dad's doing something. I'm going outside to go whatever, play with my friends. We're going to play basketball, baseball, whatever. And there was I believe it was Peter Jennings, ABC Nightly News. For all you young people, there was three stations on TV. There was no internet. They went off at nighttime, So at the end of the broadcast, it was a story about Operation Moses. I just stopped. It was almost like a God moment, right? I was going to get ready to leave. I turned, I looked at the TV, and I remember two images to this day, right? One was an Ethiopian Israeli mom with a baby wrapped behind her.
Mm-hmm.
Another one was an older person kissing the ground at Ben Gurion Airport. I didn't know what I was seeing, but it grabbed me. To this day, that was what, 40 years ago, whatever. It grabbed me. To this day, I still remember all those images. I still remember hearing it. And now I have to recognize it was something that God was kind of doing. He's almost like taking a picture and putting it into my mind. But I didn't recognize it at the time. It wasn't until years later that I recognized what that was, and the state of Israel, the Ethiopian Jewish community, all those things. So when I looked back on those types of things, God was doing little things, right, that made no sense to me at the time. So yeah, that was part of it.
I love seeing those pictures of people immigrating to Israel, from just Jewish people from all over the world, kissing the ground and crying, and they're so happy.
Right.
There's a line in the Israeli national anthem, Hatikva, that says something about like the Jewish soul like yearns for Zion or something. And it's a secular, song, but when I hear that lyric and I see those pictures, I'm like, it's a promise, it's the faithfulness of God, the way Christian supporters of Israel, like Christian Zionists, see these pictures. It's like, go. That's awesome. They made it.
Destiny, I completely agree. It is amazing to see. Like I tell pastors and leaders all the time, it's literally the Bible come to life, right? It's just, from every nation and from the four corners of the earth and everything. And what always strikes me, the older I get, whenever I reflect on Operation Moses, again, not knowing what it was, not knowing anything about the state of Israel, it emotionally impacted me, but my brain wasn't engaged, right? It was completely, because I couldn't intellectually connect it to anything. I couldn't have told you about biblical prophecies about the Jewish people returning to Israel. I knew Israel was in the Bible, right? I love the word of God. I got saved at a young age, right? I've been in church all my life, but none of these things were on my radar. But it was like, it happened almost on an emotional level. And then in retrospect, it was like the flashback made it more powerful. I said, okay, now I understand what was going on, right? Understand. And then, of course, later on, developing friendships, relationships with both Ethiopian Jews in Ethiopia, right? As well as the Ethiopian Israeli community, like you said, as well as throughout the Jewish community, right? Just to have and hear the different stories from people who fled, whether survivors of the Holocaust, those who just immigrated from the United States, those who immigrated from what we call the Mizrahi community, right? Those who fled the Farhoods in Iraq in the 1940s. So those stories never cease to amaze me, right? And just how the common denominator, the homeland of the Jewish people. So yeah, it was amazing. And it's still amazing.
Totally. Like, even after, I've been in this space for several years now, and I'm very, very familiar, very invested. But when I see, when I hear these stories and I get to experience them and see them, I'll never forget during COVID, everyone was just like killing time in COVID. And my mom and I turned on Prince of Egypt. I hadn't seen it since I was a little girl. And just that first, that first scene where like you see like the Hebrew slaves and they're like, God, deliver us. You promised us the land. I just bawled and just like had a total breakdown. And my mom had like left the room and came back and was like, are you okay?
What happened?
I was like, they finally made it. Like, I know they finally got there. And so to see,
that's neat. Wow.
And I remember seeing my first time in Israel was also with CUFI on campus. And I remember going and realizing like, wow, this is the culmination of what the heroes of my faith, people like Esther, Moses, Nehemiah, they became heroes by contributing something to the story of Israel. And like, here we are, and we can touch it, we can see it. And I'm just like, wow. And, you and I, we get to leave our mark on this story every day. It's so exciting.
When I the very, very intensely emotional moments that I had at the hotel at the Western Wall, my first year, 2012, like what you're describing, Destiny, it's very intimate, right? It's very personal. It's God, it's the Bible, it's all of those things, but everybody doesn't have the same reaction. I remember talking to people who had gone to Israel before, and I'd hear different stories, right? And the different ones about their pilgrimage. And I remember one person was telling me, just never really go in kind of with a preconceived thing. Everyone has a different emotion. He's one person, he was saying that somebody goes to Jerusalem and it was just a trip like any other trip to a foreign land, right? But somebody else may go and it might be a life-changing experience. It just really depends on who the person is and whatever's going on at that time. And I know for me, it was like you're describing there. It was very, very intense, and felt very, very connected. And very, very much commissioned too as well, right? Because it was like, for me, it's like, okay, now when you go home, you're going to do X, Y, and Z. I was like, okay, sure. I don't know how I'm going to do that, but sure, I'll do my best to do that. So yeah, it was very much a connection that was made there. That's very emotional and intellectual, all of those things. So yeah, absolutely.
What would you say to a Christian who is maybe like considering going to Israel for the first time, but not sure if it's like worth the investment? Because it can get really expensive, and someone might say, well, I can be Christian, here in Missouri where I live. Like, why should a Christian go to Israel?
I think that, and I've obviously said it for years, that if it's at all in their within their ability to do, and even beyond that, as a prayer, right? Because I know you probably have the same testimony. You met people who always wanted to go, and then a door opened and they could go, right? They didn't think they're going to be able to do it. I would always encourage believers to go because of what it does for your faith. And I don't mean your faith like, obviously we don't become more saved, right? We don't, it's not even that we necessarily love God more. None of those things, that's what happens. But there is another understanding to be in the land, right? Mm-hmm. To be in the Galilee, right? To be in Jerusalem. It is inexplicable. And the best way we can describe it is that you are in the land of the Bible. And to be with the people, right? To be with our Jewish brothers and sisters, to even see the plurality of the land, our Arab brothers and sisters, the whole everything, right? But to go for a Christian to go to the land and to see the sites that are spoken of in your scriptures, right? To see the Jezreel Valley, to read about it is one thing, to stand there and then to see it actually there, a physical reality. It does, to me, it really does, as many pastors have said, and it's almost a cliche, but it's really true. It's like your faith come to life in a way that you can see. It's one pastor said, it's like watching TV and then watching HDTV, right? You're like, oh, okay, that's what this looks like. This looks like this. And then I'll also just add to it, Destiny, that the feeling. I remember my wife, when Valerie first went, right? I'd gone several times before she went, and we were on another music trip or something. We literally touched down at Ben Gurion Airport, and she began to weep. Literally, we just got to the airport, right? And we were there. We did a tour for several days, and when it's time to go, she said, "All I want to do is go home and get our kids and come back." She said, "That's all I want to do," right? And I think it was Elie Wiesel who said that. Was it him or another rabbi who actually said that when you come there, you're coming home, right? It's you really feel it. So for believers, whether they're pastors, lay members, if you can go. Don't miss that opportunity. Yes, it doesn't make you more saved again, but it is an amazing experience that you will have, that in terms of the Word of God and your relationship with Him. There's something that happens there in the land that's really indescribable, and you can't compare it to anything else. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I completely agree. Could you tell us a bit? So you, like you said earlier, you founded an organization, IBSI, the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. Can you tell us about your organization and the kinds of work that you do?
Sure. So back to that time when I was there at the Western Wall, 2012, it was a dual thing. It was a real desire to continue to strengthen that historical relationship between the Black and Jewish community, particularly in the U.S. and then Africa and Israel. Um, the story of Black Americans, everything, just a broad story. I talk about in my book, Zionism and the Black Church, because it's broad. Every story has its own variations, but from slavery, Jim Crow, civil rights, just a story and heritage of a people that over centuries had endured so much and had accomplished so much, right? So much in common with our Jewish brothers and sisters, same thing, right? In that story is interwoven the Black and the Jewish communities working together, right? Many people point to the iconic relationship of Dr. King and Joshua Heschel, but before Dr. King was even born, Julius Rosenwald, Booker T. Washington, right? They come together, build the Rosenwald schools for millions of Black students who otherwise would not have been able to go to school without something intervening in that way. And Julius Rosenwald's philanthropy, not just in terms of the undergraduate, but I mean for K through 12, if you will, but also post high school, right? He had the Rosenwald fellowships, and people like Marian Anderson, the opera singer, and Langston Hughes and James Baldwin, and on and on. These people received scholarships from this Jewish man's philanthropy. And it was just an iconic, again, moment that would always resonate. The NAACP, founded by Jewish and Black Americans, and on and on. And what we say often in our organization that the first Israel-Africa summit was actually when the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon in Jerusalem 3,000 years ago. The relationship goes back, it's multi-layered, and it goes back millennia, right? So for us, it is a mandate to continue to strengthen that relationship. And I'll also say that in strengthening that, whether it's Black and Jewish synergy in different cities, different projects working on the community, those, again, we don't strengthen it, meaning it's already there. We don't have to do anything, but highlighting it, making sure that people are aware of that relationship and how valuable it has been, how powerful it's been for both communities and everything. And I often tell, especially the younger people, well, the pastors as well, that you know how valuable something is when there's always an attempt to destroy it, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of the context of spiritual warfare, I believe it was Jake's years ago, it said that, T.D. Jake said that a mugger doesn't look to rob somebody who looks poor. He looks to rob someone who looks like they have something, their watch, their shoes, or something like that. So the same thing is true in terms of spiritual warfare. Those who are in possession of something very valuable, the scripture says we have this treasure hidden in the earthen vessels, right? And it's manifested in many, many different ways. This relationship between the Black and Jewish community and between Israel and Africa, one of the reasons why it's so important is because systematically, whenever Israel is demonized, it's almost always in the context of race, right? Israel's a Jim Crow state, it's an apartheid state. Why do they always choose a Black narrative to disparage Israel? One of those reasons is because of the long-standing relationship that's actually there, the attempt to drive the wedge. So our organization exists to continue to strengthen, highlight that relationship, and to see it go into this next phase, destiny. Yeah, I'm sure you know this. You're always so learned in our study. We recognize, what is it? The Pew Center says that by 2050, the majority of the world's Christians will be in Africa, right? Literally, there's bad news and good news. The bad news is that in the Western world, the Christian numbers are dwindling for lots of different reasons. The good news is that in certain parts of Latin America and Africa, it's exploding, right? And so you have more and more, whether it's birth rates, whether it's just the preaching of the gospel, it's like spreading throughout much of Africa. So that means that most of the Christian Zionists are going to be in Africa in a few years, right? This is actually a reality that we're in. And not to mention the tech and the water, the irrigation, all these things that Israel is so crucial in helping Africa with, right? Mm-hmm. And once again, if we know how valuable something is because of the negativity, look at Russia, look at China, they are, and look at Iran, they are also focused on Africa for their own reasons as well, right? So our organization highlights those things and seeks to strengthen that reality, whether it's the clergy, whether it's the lay community. And yeah, that's what we do. And we take young people to Israel, we take them to Africa so they can see that synergy up close and personal.
That's incredible. One of my favorite events that I traveled and coordinated my travel with you and Miss Valerie was the African Night to Honor Israel that we did in the Minneapolis area. I know these events and this passion for this connection, the like relationship between Israel and Africa is so it's so present, and it's so I mean, it's just passionate. There's no other word for that.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I've having had the opportunity and the privilege of being in this pro-Israel space for these many years, almost a decade now, and doing the diversity outreach, right? Intentionally going to Hispanic communities, Asian communities, right? Doing bilingual events and everything, and reaching what we call the multi-ethnic body of Christ, right? That every nation, tribe, kindred, and tongue. I can say without comparison, without in any way, in a competitive type of thing, when I'm in the African events, whether in Africa or here, it's right. This love, these songs about Zion that are probably centuries old, right? Just like the Negro spirituals, right? This, I mean, genuine love for Israel and the Jewish people, which is why when we talk about all the Christian population continuing to explode in Africa, they are often naturally disposed. They love the Bible. They believe the Bible. They believe that Israel is God's chosen. They make pilgrimage to this day. Nigeria, the different nations, whenever you go, and you've been to Israel many times, you'll see different groups. It's nothing to see a group of Nigerians, a group of Ghanaians, right? As pastors, as church, all the time, because they have a love for Israel, the land and the people, right? And such a respect so the night African night on Israel, there's singing, there's dancing, there's the speeches and everything, but it's heartfelt. It's not just, as you know, just something that's being said. There truly is. And shout out to Dr. Francis Tabla out there in the Minneapolis area. He started that, and I had the privilege of working with him. He had started it before I was on staff with CUFI. Oh, wow. And we just reached out and said, hey, what you're doing is amazing. We just want to partner with you and everything. And so he's been doing it, gosh, 8, 9 years, maybe this might be even 10th anniversary that's coming up and everything. So it's been amazing.
Wow. That's incredible. Yeah, I remember I went to church, his church, the church where this event was being held, their Sunday morning service. And when he announced the event, he was like, we're going to be proud to be African tonight. Please, no Western clothes. If you have African clothes, please wear your African clothes. Someone after church was like, hey, like, do you have any African clothes? And I was like, no. And so someone gave me just like this beautiful
yes, ma'am.
outfit to wear. And
yes, ma'am.
It's just such a beautiful celebration because, we like to tell, like at ICC, we like to tell students that, whatever their connection to Israel is, they should be proud to be who they are and, bring their full selves with them into, these pro-Israel spaces and, bring their Zionism with them out into whatever spaces that they're going into, beyond that. And I think that's just such a perfect example of celebrating who you are and celebrating your passion and love for Israel at the same time.
It's funny because having done a couple of events on the continent, like we did, I've done a South African night on Israel. I did something in Ethiopia. It's amazing, beautiful, everything. When Dr. Tabla and I would talk, and I would talk with other African leaders about this as well. We often, our African brothers and sisters would want us to come there. Africa's a huge continent, right? Well, Dumisani, come to Ghana. Dumisani, come to Kenya. And you could spend the rest of your life just trying to come to one because it's so huge. Right. I said, one of the great things about being in America is that all of those nations are represented here. So we have basically what's a Pan-African. My daughter-in-law, Olga, she's from South Africa. She said, Dad, she said it's probably for the best for now. She said, because when we have it in our regions, we all want it to be ours. No, this is the South African one. No, this is the, she said, when it's Pan-African like that, everybody just kind of does this general celebration and everything. And because, if it's in Minneapolis or Brooklyn okay, all right, well, so we're in America, we'll just do it this way. And what I found is that what Dr. Tabla tapped into, right? You'll see the flags of the different nations and everything. They're proud to be American citizens. They're proud of their nations, where they're from, and they love Israel. And it's just, you can feel it. So some of our Jewish friends who will come, they said, I've heard about it, I haven't come before. They would come and they'd be like, oh my God. Yeah. So the dancing, the singing, everything. Yeah. It's amazing celebration. Yeah.
That's incredible. What, I know you follow like Africa-Israel relations. Is there anything, in Israel's relations with any African countries that you think would surprise people who aren't following those relationships as closely?
We just finished recording. Yeah. So we're working on right now. We do educational videos organization, and the one that's coming out now, it's called The Pan-African Legacy of Golda Meir. Right. So Golda Meir, the only female prime minister of Israel, she was one of the first foreign ministers of Israel. And she embodied Theodore Herzl's desire, as he said in his book, to see, once he had seen the redemption of his people, he wanted to assist in the redemption of the African. This was something he actually said. She actually quoted in her book as well. And so I tell people Israel's relationship throughout the continent. Golda Meir was saying that just as they had emerged from, occupation, colonization, those types of things. Those who know Israel's history, Britain ruled, and it wasn't really a good time. I mean, the Jewish people really, really suffered. I mean, that was kind of the last stop before independence, right? That almost 2,000 years, a lot of people think, oh, Britain was cool. It's like, yeah, if you know the whole story, it's kind of, yeah. And so for that, she was talking about how they had to emerge and learn the land again, the irrigation and agriculture and all those things. And they actively shared those things with Africa, because at the same time colonialism was falling in Africa and Ghana and in Kenya, this in the 50s and the 60s. Israel has been a partner. There are times when the relationship, I can feel the cynics are going to be watching this. Oh, yeah, there have been difficulties in the relationship, like any other relationship, especially one that's 3,000 years old. Sometimes there's some bumps in the road, right? But by and large, is Israel's Africa's greatest regional partner has been Israel by far. They'll tell you that themselves, right? And so by the 1970s, Destiny, you had several African nations whose currency was actually stronger than the US dollar, right? Zambia, by the mid-1970s, Asian nations like Singapore were visiting Zambia to see how much it was flourishing, right? And they're looking over here, the Israelis built this university. Look over here, the Israelis, right? So the Israelis were very much very much involved in that development, but not in an imperialist way, right? I told my Jewish friends all the time, you all are the worst imperialists in the world, right? There's supposed to be Israeli flags all over the continent. No, there's embassies all over, right? But there's not the desire to take over this and control that, but it's a working with, because there's always been this Israeli understanding that as Africa is strong, then the region is strong and safer, right? A destabilized region helps nobody, right? Because it's more terrorism, it's more violence, all of those things. So I think people will be surprised to know that all of the, whether it's irrigation technology, whether it's, again, agriculture, solar energy, all of these things, Israel, not just as a government, but the NGOs, individuals, right, have been working with Africa and so close. And that has a lot also to do with the love for the modern state of Israel that you find throughout the continent, because there's this understanding. One of the, Julius Nyerere, who was the president of Tanzania back in that day with Golda Meir, he called her the mother of Africa, because she was so concerned. I'll say one little quick story. You'll see it in the video. Rhodesia was what Zimbabwe was called before it was changed back to its culturally specific name. She was visiting at the time, this was in the 60s, I think, Destiny, and Rhodesia borders South Africa, so it had the same type of apartheid government that South Africa had. And the leaders of Rhodesia wanted her to come and visit, but told her she'd have to keep her Black accompaniment there, because no joke, they said, you can come, but those Black people, so she basically told them in a very nice way, thank you, no thank you, right? So for her, this was like, she knew it was an affront, so she refused to go and visit that side, because she knew that her Black friends and those other diplomats were not allowed to go there. This is who she was, and she embodied that. Many people aren't aware of that type of depth of the relationship that's there.
Wow. Yeah, I think most people wouldn't know that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So my last question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
You have worked with, yes, like several, pastors and community leaders, but I know you also have such a heart for young people. You're a dad, you're now a grandfather, and I know like your children, they're millennials, they're Gen Z, age. what advice do you have for pro-Israel young people who are, really facing some challenges on campus, and it isn't always easy to be proudly Zionist on campus these days?
My heart, as you know, Destiny's always gone out with the campus thing. The young people in general, yeah, but the campus part, because of where we are in our nation, anti-Semitism at levels never before seen since the Second World War, all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
I encourage those students, whether they're Jewish students or whether they're non-Jewish pro-Israel students, right? Those allies, to continue to be proud, be strong, to continue to, there's always still strength in numbers, right? So whatever your campus group is, and ICC does an amazing job, continue to stay connected to them, right? Because it keeps you from feeling isolated. It keeps you from feeling that type of pressure where here's this some of the negative. And for those students who are on campuses that aren't bad like that, that's great, and thank God for it every day, right? But for those of you that are, stay connected with your group, right? So that you all can draw strength from each other, right? Because it's extremely, extremely important. And continue to speak truth, right? There are times, I have a big mouth, I got it from my parents, but there are times when we are sometimes afraid to say what's true because of the pressure that's around. I want to encourage you to still speak truth. Just know that for any of the pushback that you get, there's way more people just listening who need the truth, right? Sometimes the loud mouths are a few of them, right? But they never represent the whole. They never represent the plurality. There's some people who just need the information that you have, right? They need to know. They need to know that Israel, the IDF, puts itself in harm's way to help protect the people of Gaza when missiles are being fired indiscriminately at Palestinians as well as Israelis. If you don't say it on the campus, they may never know. So sometimes you have to say the thing that might feel unpopular or might get some pushback, but I guarantee you that as you do those things, you're going to help somebody else who really needs to have more of an understanding. You're going to be a light for them in the midst of darkness. So just want to encourage you guys to continue to do what you're doing.
It's so true. Part of advocacy is having like an educational approach and having the heart of an educator. And if people don't know and we don't tell them, they won't know. So that's sound advice. Thank you so much. I've really loved having you on the podcast today. Thank you again, Pastor Dumisani Washington, for joining us.
Anytime, Destiny. Thanks for having me.